"Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt," cried the obese girl. Then the mountain man did this. "Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt." The plea fluttered into the pine dusk and died there, swallowed by boots and breath and the hiss of leaves. Josie Whitmore lay curled in the litter of autumn needles, dress torn, cheeks streaked with mud and blood. 18, soft-bodied, apple-cheeked, and shaking so hard the forest floor seemed to tremble with her. Pike's heel drew back for the finishing blow. Clem's laughter was thin and mean. Garrett Whitmore, uncle, guardian, thief, watched like a man pricing livestock. "End it," Garrett said. "She's a problem that solves itself." Pike's boot cut the air. It never landed. "Touch her again, and it will be the last thing you do." The voice came from the tree line, low, iron, unarguable. Branches parted. A man stepped through the dark as if the trees themselves made way for him. Ezekiel Thornwood was built like the mountain that raised him, broad-shouldered, weather-cut, eyes the pale gray of a sky that decides what lives. A rifle rested easy on his shoulder. At his knee padded a great wolf dog, silent as a shadow. Pike swung anyway. The rifle stock blurred once. Pike folded as if the forest had opened a trap door beneath him. Clem reached for steel and found fangs instead. The wolf dog's growl froze his hand mid-thought. Garrett finally remembered fear and went for his pistol. The stranger took it from him without seeming to move at all. "This is family business," Garrett rasped. "No," the mountain man said. "This is a beating, and it stops now." The forest listened. The men ran. The wolf dog watched them go with yellow eyes that made promises. Ezekiel dropped to a knee beside the girl. "You're safe," he said, already tearing linen, already making fire out of cold. "You hear me? You're safe." Somewhere far away, church bells that didn't exist told the end of one life and the start of another. When Josie woke, the air smelled of pine smoke and leather oil. A low fire burned in a stone hearth. She tried to sit up, but pain anchored her to the bed. Every inch of her body ached. Her ribs screamed. Then a quiet voice said, "Easy. You move too fast, you'll start bleeding again." Zeke Thornwood sat beside her, sleeves rolled up, forearms corded with old scars. In the firelight, his eyes were neither cruel nor gentle, just steady, like a man who had already seen too much and chose silence over promises. "You're safe here," he said. "My cabin. Closest doctor's a day away. You wouldn't have made it." Josie blinked, tears stinging her swollen eyes. "You saved me." "I just stopped bad men from finishing what they started." He turned to stir a pot over the fire. "Eat when you can. Pain means you're still alive." Days passed before she could move without gasping. Each morning, Zeke tended her wounds with hands too careful for a man that size. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice was deep and low, like gravel in a riverbed. Josie learned pieces of him in fragments. Once a soldier in the war, then a trapper, then simply a man who walked away from everything. "Too many graves," he said once. "I built one for myself up here, but somehow I kept waking up." She smiled faintly through cracked lips. "Then you found me?" His eyes softened, just a breath. "Yeah, found trouble again." When she was strong enough to sit by the fire, Josie told him what happened, about her parents' deaths, the uncle who stole their land, the night he dragged her into the woods to erase her name from the world. She tried not to cry, but when she did, Zeke just let her. He didn't offer comfort or pity, only quiet. And in that quiet, she found something close to peace. "You think he'll come looking?" he asked finally. Josie nodded. "He wants the deed. As long as I'm alive, he can't have it." Zeke stared into the flames. "Then he'll come, and when he does, he won't find you helpless." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He stood, motioning toward the door. "When you can walk, I'll show you the woods. How to hide, how to shoot, how to survive. You won't ever beg again." The first time she stepped outside, snow flurries danced through shafts of pale light. The cabin stood in a clearing ringed by pines and mountains that cut the sky. Shadow, the wolf dog, trailed her every step, protective and watchful. Josie shivered, wrapping the blanket tighter. "It's beautiful here, but so empty." Zeke adjusted the strap on his rifle. "Emptiness isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's room to start over." She looked at him, really looked, at the man who lived like the mountain itself, hard, quiet, enduring. And something inside her, long bruised and small, dared to hope that maybe she'd been brought here for a reason. By the time the snows thickened on Devil's Ridge, Josie could stand on her own again. Her steps were slow but steady. Her body still hurt, but it belonged to her once more. Zeke didn't coddle her. He taught her. "Mountain doesn't care who you are," he told her one morning, handing her a small axe. "Only how much fight you've got left." He showed her how to split wood without cutting her fingers, how to track rabbits by the faintest print, how to keep fire even when rain tried to kill it. Shadow, the great wolf dog, was always there, silent guardian, yellow eyes glowing like embers in the mist. At first, Josie's hands blistered, her arms shook, her breath caught. But she never quit. Every failure hardened into strength. Every bruise became proof. Zeke never praised, never mocked, only nodded once when she managed to chop clean through a log without missing. That nod meant more than words ever could. Nights on the mountain were long and quiet. The wind pressed against the cabin like a living thing, moaning through the pines. Zeke would sit by the fire, mending traps or sharpening blades, while Josie stitched torn shirts or stirred stew. They spoke little, but the silence between them was not cold anymore. One evening, Josie glanced at him across the table. "Why did you help me?" He didn't look up. "Didn't plan to. Just heard someone begging in the dark." "That's not what I mean." Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "You risked your life for me. You could have walked away." Zeke set the knife down. "I've walked away from too many." Their eyes met then, hers soft and searching, his tired but alive in a way they hadn't been for years. As weeks passed, small changes settled in. Zeke built her a separate cot so she wouldn't sleep on the floor anymore. He found her a shawl in his supplies, too big, patched at the edges. But when she wrapped it around herself, it smelled faintly of cedar and safety. In return, Josie brought warmth back into his cabin. She scrubbed the walls, fixed the shutters, cooked hearty meals that filled the air with the scent of broth and herbs. For the first time in a long while, laughter, soft, shy laughter, drifted through the smoke. Once, when Zeke came in from the cold covered in snow, Josie scolded him gently. "You'll freeze yourself to death one of these days." He smirked, shaking off his coat. "You planning to save me too?" "Someone has to," she said, smiling despite herself. Then came the night of the storm. The wind howled like a beast outside. Snow beat against the door in angry fists. The fire burned low, and the chimney whistled like a scream. Zeke checked the shutters, then turned to find Josie shivering under her blanket, her face pale. "Fire's dying," she murmured. He fed it more wood, but the logs were damp. The smoke turned bitter. The temperature dropped fast. Without a word, Zeke fetched another quilt and laid it over her. "You'll freeze on the floor," she said. "I've slept colder." She hesitated, then whispered, "Please, sit. The fire's warmer if you stay close." Zeke stood still a long moment. Then he sat on the rug beside her, his back to the fire. The glow caught the hard lines of his face, softening them. She leaned just enough for her shoulder to brush his arm. Neither moved away. Outside, the mountain screamed. Inside, something gentler took root. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside was white and clean, reborn under sunlight. Josie stepped to the doorway, breath fogging in the cold. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Zeke joined her, his voice low. "You survived worse than this. Don't ever forget that." Josie turned to him, eyes bright, the first spark of confidence glowing there. "You're the reason I did." He shook his head slowly. "No, Josie, you saved yourself. I just reminded you you could." The look she gave him then, soft, grateful, filled with something new, made Zeke realize that for the first time in years, the silence of the mountains didn't feel lonely. Winter wrapped the mountains in silence, but inside Zeke Thornwood's cabin, life slowly began to thaw. The fire burned brighter these days. The air, once heavy with smoke and solitude, now smelled of broth, pine resin, and fresh bread. Zeke had always believed the mountain didn't allow softness. It demanded endurance. But since Josie's arrival, the cabin had changed, and so had he. Josie's strength returned faster than either of them expected. She still limped a little, her ribs ached in the cold, but there was color back in her cheeks now, and laughter that crept out when she least expected it. Every morning she insisted on helping with chores, fetching water from the stream, sweeping the cabin, mending Zeke's shirts that had long forgotten what neat stitches looked like. At first, Zeke argued. Then, as he watched her determination, he stopped. "You don't have to do all this," he told her one morning. "I know," Josie said, wringing out a cloth, "but I want to. You saved my life, Zeke. Let me give something back." He frowned slightly, not out of irritation, but confusion. "I didn't save you for payment." "I know that, too," she said, smiling softly. "Maybe that's why I want to stay." The words hung in the air longer than either of them expected. As days grew shorter, their routine became an unspoken rhythm. Zeke would head into the woods at dawn, returning by afternoon with game or firewood. Josie would have soup waiting for him, the kind that smelled like warmth itself. He'd sit at the table, silent as always, and she'd chatter about the little things, the color of the sky that morning, the tracks she'd found near the creek, the fact that Shadow refused to let her fetch water alone. "You talk to fill the quiet," he said one evening, smirking faintly. Josie stirred her stew. "I talk because the quiet used to scare me, but with you here, it doesn't any more." That silenced even Zeke. Snow piled higher. The cold thickened. Nights stretched on like an endless hush, broken only by the crackle of firewood and the occasional low growl of Shadow dreaming by the hearth. Sometimes, when Josie fell asleep by the fire, Zeke would glance at her, the gentle curve of her face in the glow, the peace that seemed to soften the world around her. And he'd look away quickly, as if caught trespassing on something sacred. He'd whisper to himself, "Don't do it, old fool," then stoke the fire and go back to mending traps. But his hands always trembled a little after that. One night, Josie woke to the sound of thunder. No, not thunder, but Zeke shouting in his sleep. He thrashed on the floor near the hearth, trapped in some nightmare of gunfire and smoke. "Zeke!" she cried, rushing to him. His eyes snapped open, wild. For a heartbeat, he didn't see her, only ghosts. Then her hands were on his shoulders, her voice trembling but calm. "It's me. You're safe. You're home." The word home broke something in him. Zeke sat up, shaking, sweat gleaming on his brow. "You shouldn't have to see that." "I wanted to," she said softly, "if it means knowing the man who saved me." He turned his face away, ashamed. "You don't know the half of it." "Then tell me," she whispered. He hesitated, then said, "I was a soldier once. Killed men I never saw. Lost brothers I did. When the war ended, I came up here thinking the mountain could bury what was left of me, but it didn't. It just waited." Josie reached out, touching his hand gently. "And now?" He looked at her then, eyes glinting in the dim firelight. "Now, the ghosts are quieter when you're near." After that night, something shifted. Quiet, undeniable. Zeke still called her Miss Whitmore out of habit, but sometimes, when he forgot himself, it came out softer. Josie, she in turn stopped calling him Mr. Thornwood, just Zeke, and every time she said it, it sounded like the beginning of forgiveness for both of them. One evening, as snow fell in thick white sheets outside, Josie stood at the window, looking out at the world that had once tried to kill her. "Funny," she murmured. "I used to think snow was cruel, cold, endless, merciless, but here it feels like protection." Zeke joined her, his voice a low rumble behind her. "Snow covers the scars till spring comes, gives the earth time to heal." She turned, smiling faintly. "Is that what we're doing then? Waiting for spring?" He met her eyes, and for once he didn't look away. "Maybe we're the ones it's waiting for." The silence that followed was tender, heavy with what neither dared to say yet. Outside, the mountain breathed. Inside, two wounded hearts, once strangers in pain, began to thaw together in the firelight. Spring came to the mountains like a promise whispered too softly. Snow melted into silver rivers, and the forest floor awakened with color. For the first time since she could remember, Josie Whitmore felt peace, real peace. She and Zeke had built a quiet rhythm together. He hunted, she tended the cabin and the small garden she'd planted by the stream. At night, they shared stories in the flickering firelight. The loneliness that had once filled the cabin had been replaced by something that neither dared to name, but both could feel. One morning, Josie was feeding shadow scraps by the porch when she saw something glinting at the tree line, a distant shimmer, metal catching sunlight. Her heart stilled. "Zeke!" she called, voice sharp. He stepped out, rifle already in hand. The old soldier in him never truly slept. His eyes followed her gaze. For a long moment there was only wind. Then a figure moved among the trees. They weren't alone. Zeke's jaw tightened. "Inside, now." Josie obeyed, but fear she thought she'd buried rose again like ice water through her veins. That night, as they sat by the fire, she couldn't eat. It was him, she whispered. "Garrett, it had to be." Zeke stirred the stew without looking up. "I've been expecting it. Men like him don't let go of what they think they own." She flinched. "He's not finished with me." "No," Zeke said. "But I am." Josie frowned. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes, the fire reflecting in the gray of his irises. "I won't let him touch you again, not while I'm breathing." Something in his tone, steady, absolute, made her believe it, but fear still twisted in her chest. "You can't face him alone, Zeke. He'll have men." Zeke's mouth curved into a humorless smile. "Then I'll bury more than one." The next few days passed in uneasy silence. Zeke began setting traps along the outer trail and cleaning his weapons. Josie helped as best she could, though her hands trembled. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" she asked one evening as she mended a tear in his coat. "Every day," he said. "But some things are worth the trouble." She looked up. "Like me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, scarred, but warm. "Especially you." The storm came at dawn, not one of snow or thunder, but of boots and guns. 6 men rode into the clearing, rifles slung low, dust rising in the cold morning air. Garrett Whitmore rode at their head, smug and alive, wearing a fine wool coat bought with stolen money. "Zeke Thornwood!" Garrett shouted. "I've come for what's mine." Zeke stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "You mean the land you stole or the girl you tried to kill?" Garrett's smile was slow and cruel. "Both. You should have stayed out of this, mountain man. This isn't your fight." "Then why are you standing on my mountain?" Behind Garrett, one of the hired guns shifted nervously. "Boss, maybe we don't need to—" Garrett's pistol fired before the man could finish. Smoke curled from the barrel. "Any more questions?" he snarled. Josie gasped from inside the cabin. Zeke's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "That was your last mistake." The battle was brutal. Zeke moved like a storm himself, silent, efficient, deadly. Every shot he fired found its mark. Shadow lunged from the tree line, knocking one man down before he could reload. Josie, trembling but unbroken, loaded spare rounds for Zeke, her hand steady even as her heart raced. Within minutes, the clearing was chaos, smoke, shouting, the acrid stench of gunpowder. Then, silence. Garrett was on his knees, blood streaking his face, hatred burning in his eyes. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "She's mine. Everything she owns is mine." Zeke struck him once, hard, enough to drop him into the dirt. "She doesn't belong to anyone." He looked down at Garrett, voice low, final. "If you ever come near her again, I'll finish what Mercy wouldn't let me." Garrett spat, but the defiance in his eyes had turned to fear. He crawled to his horse and fled, wounded, humiliated, leaving his men behind. When it was over, Zeke dropped to one knee, exhaustion washing through him. Josie ran to him, cupping his face in her trembling hands. "You're hurt," she said, tears spilling freely now. "I've been worse," he said, wincing. "You could have died." He smiled faintly. "Worth it. Don't say that." Her voice broke. "Don't you ever say that. You're all I have left." Zeke caught her hand, pressing it to his chest. "Then you'll never lose me." She shook her head, sobbing now. "I don't want to live scared any more, Zeke. I want to live. I want to take back everything he stole from my family, from me." He brushed his thumb over her cheek. "Then we'll go to town. We'll tell them everything. No more hiding." Her tears turned to determination. Together? Always. That night, when the fire burned low, Zeke sat beside her and said quietly, "You ever wonder why I live up here, Josie?" She looked up. "Because you lost too much." He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I think I was just waiting." "For what?" she asked. "For you." The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was full, heavy with everything they hadn't yet said. 2 days later, the trail to Cedar Hollow wound down through melting snow and into spring rain. Josie rode beside Zeke, her back straight, her eyes fixed ahead. She had never looked more alive. She wore a borrowed coat, too large for her shoulders but lined with quiet strength. At her hip hung the deed to her family's land, creased, dirty, but finally real again. Zeke rode silently, watching the road, one hand resting near the rifle strapped to his saddle. Every now and then his eyes flicked toward her, not out of doubt, but out of something that looked dangerously close to pride. "You don't have to do this," he said. Josie tightened her grip on the reins. "If I don't, he wins, and I'm done letting men like him win." Zeke nodded once. "Then I'll be right there beside you." Cedar Hollow had always been a hard town, half law, half rumor. When Zeke and Josie rode in, heads turned. Whispers followed them through the muddy street. "That's her, the Whitmore girl. Thought she was dead." "Who's the man with her?" "Mountain savage, Thornwood. Heard he kills for pelts." Josie kept her chin high, but the old shame twisted in her chest. Zeke's deep voice broke through the noise. "Let them talk. They weren't there when you survived." They stopped outside the sheriff's office. Sheriff Daniel Morgan, a man in his 50s with the look of someone who'd spent too long staring down trouble, stepped onto the porch. "Thornwood," he said. "Been a while." Zeke nodded. "Need your help, Dan." The sheriff's eyes shifted to Josie. Recognition flickered. "Whitmore girl, isn't it? Heard bad things." Josie's voice didn't shake. "Then hear the truth." In the courthouse the next day, the truth finally found light. Josie told her story, every piece of it. The theft, the years of humiliation, the night Garrett dragged her into the forest. Her voice broke once, but she never stopped. The courtroom was silent. Even the men who had mocked her before sat still, ashamed. Zeke spoke next. Quiet and measured, he described what he had seen, the beating, the blood, the way she had begged for mercy from her own kin. When he finished, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Garrett Whitmore, seated at the defense table, sneered. "All this for a fat little liar with a sob story? You expect them to believe?" "Enough!" The judge's gavel slammed down. Judge William Hartley's gray eyes cut through the noise. "We'll have no insults in this court." Sheriff Morgan rose. "We've got more than words, Your Honor. Found 6 hired guns hiding near Devil's Ridge. 2 confessed. They said Garrett Whitmore paid them to hunt the girl." Garrett's smirk faltered. "Lies. All of it." "Sit down," the judge ordered. The verdict came before sunset. Guilty on every count. Attempted murder, conspiracy, theft of inheritance. When they led Garrett away in irons, he turned once to glare at Josie. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You're still nothing." Josie met his gaze with something he'd never seen in her before. Pity. "You're wrong, Uncle. I'm finally something." Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of rain and justice. Townsfolk who had once looked down on her now stepped aside, some even tipping their hats. Zeke stood by the hitching post, waiting. His hat was low, his expression unreadable. When Josie approached, he asked simply, "You ready to go home?" She smiled through tears. "Home?" He nodded toward the mountains. "That's what it's been for me, but only because you're there now." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached for his hand, hesitant, brave. "Zeke, you saved me twice, once from them and once from myself." He squeezed her hand gently. "And you saved me from being a ghost." The wind caught her hair, and she laughed softly. "Maybe we were meant to find each other out there." He looked down at her, that rare, small smile lifting the corners of his mouth. "Maybe the mountain's kinder than it looks." They climbed into the wagon together. Behind them, the town buzzed with talk of justice served. Ahead, the mountains waited, wild, silent, eternal. That night, back at the cabin, the firelight played across their faces as they sat close, too tired to speak. Shadow slept at their feet. "Zeke," she whispered, "if tomorrow were our last day, would you change anything?" He turned to her, eyes soft in the glow. "Just one thing." "What's that?" "I'd have found you sooner." The words hung between them, heavy with truth. She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek, and leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time since her parents died, Josie Whitmore slept without fear. The years that followed moved gently, like the slow rivers that ran through the valley beneath Devil's Peak. What once had been a lonely cabin hidden among the pines became a home that pulsed with laughter, smoke, and the smell of bread baking over a wood fire. Zeke Thornwood had built many things in his life, traps, shelters, fences, but never something that lasted, until Josie. They were married in the spring of the following year. The ceremony was small, held in Cedar Hollow's little white church, its bell rusted, but still ringing proudly that morning. The townsfolk came. Sheriff Morgan, Reverend Whitmore, even the judge who had sent Garrett away. Some came out of curiosity, others out of guilt, but by the time Josie walked down the aisle, every head in that church bowed with quiet respect. She wore a simple cream dress she had sewn herself. Her full figure glowed with health, her eyes bright, her hands steady. When she reached the altar, Zeke took her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I once thought my life ended in war," he said when it was his turn to speak. "Turns out I was just waiting for peace to find me." Josie smiled, tears trembling on her lashes. "And I thought I'd never be wanted, until you saw me when no one else would." When they kissed, even the Reverend's voice cracked on the final blessing. 10 years later, the mountains told a different story. The cabin had doubled in size, its roof mended, its garden stretching toward the river. A small wooden schoolhouse stood nearby, painted white, its windows shining in the morning sun. Children's laughter spilled through the trees. Josie taught there, reading, writing, and kindness. Many of her students were orphans, children who had known pain far too early. She often told them, "You are not what the world has done to you. You are what you decide to build from it." Zeke, his hair now streaked with gray, spent his days crafting furniture, carving toys for the children, and repairing rifles for passing travelers. But in the evenings, he always came home before sunset, always to her. One night, as the sky deepened to violet and the smell of pine smoke curled through the open door, Josie sat on the porch with their youngest daughter asleep in her lap. "Remember the night you found me?" she asked softly. Zeke chuckled low. "Hard to forget. You were half dead, cussing at me between prayers." She laughed, shaking her head. "And you were the angriest, gentlest man I'd ever met." He looked at her then, and though years had passed, his gaze was still as steady, still as wild. "I didn't save you, Josie. You saved me. You gave me a reason to stop running from ghosts." She reached for his hand, older now but still strong. "And you taught me that love isn't about rescue. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard." Down the path, Shadow's grandchildren, a litter of wolf-dog pups, chased each other through the grass. Their children's laughter echoed from the garden. Zeke leaned back, arm around his wife, eyes on the fading light over Devil's Peak. "World's quieter now," he murmured. Josie smiled. "Maybe it's just that we've finally learned to listen." He nodded. "To each other." The wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, the same mountain air that had once witnessed pain and now watched over peace. Josie rested her head against his shoulder. "Promise me something, Zeke." "Anything." "When people tell our story, when they speak about the mountain man and the girl who wouldn't die, promise they'll know it wasn't about strength or revenge." He turned, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "Then what was it about?" "About mercy," she said softly, "and about staying when the rest of the world walks away." That night, under the stars, the fire burned low. Their children slept, the cabin warm with life. Outside, the forest hummed, alive with crickets and wind and the heartbeat of a place that had seen too much sorrow to forget the worth of peace. And somewhere far below in the town that once mocked her, the bell of Cedar Hollow tolled softly, a sound of faith, not fear, because the girl who once cried, "Please don't kick me, I'm already hurt," had become the woman who built a life so steady no cruelty could ever break it again. And the man who once lived alone with ghosts found what every soldier dreams of after the war, a reason to stay. And that's where their story ends, up there in the wild country where snow still falls heavy and the wind still whispers through the pines. Zeke Thornwood, the man who once lived only for survival, found something stronger than fear. Josephine Whitmore, the girl who once begged not to be hurt, became the woman who refused to leave, who turned pain into purpose and loneliness into a home. If you ever find yourself standing at the edge of everything, tired, afraid, certain that the world has already decided your worth, remember her. Remember that even the broken can be rebuilt. That kindness can bloom in the unlikeliest soil. And that love doesn't always arrive wrapped in poetry. Sometimes it rides out of the woods, covered in dust and scars, speaking little but meaning everything, because that's what saved her and him. And maybe, somewhere deep down, it's what can save all of us too. Every time I read your comments, I'm reminded that stories like this don't just belong to the past, they belong to us. To everyone who still believes that gentleness can stand against cruelty, and that love, no matter how late it comes, can still change a life. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? From the quiet hills, the busy cities, the faraway coasts? Wherever you are, if you still believe in second chances, if you still believe that love can heal even the deepest scars, don't go anywhere, because the next story is already waiting for you, and it's one you won't forget.